It is desirable, in short, that in things which do not primarily concern others, individuality should assert itself. If it were felt that the free development of individuality is one of the leading essentials of well-being, there would be no danger that liberty would be undervalued. If we could get to people to understand that individual freedoms are important for all of us to have, the nice things we have, like enough food to eat, houses to live in, freedom from war and poverty or whatever. If people understood that individuality as such, just the freedom of the individual, is essential to bringing us the good life, then everybody would understand why we have to leave the individual free. That is a lovely thought, and it's almost tempting, but it's not true. Today you can tell them that. You can say, look, we need the individual to be free to act as he pleases, as long as he doesn't hurt others, in order that we can have our cars and our power plants, electricity, and good medical care, and be searching for the cure to cancer and whatever. We have to have individual freedom and liberty for these. And there is a group today that responds, to hell with all that. I want trees and babbling brooks with fish in them and mosquitoes to live free in the ponds, and I want the wetlands and swamps back, and I want to stop deforestation, and to hell with mankind's good. To hell with the well-being, as John Stuart Mill says. To hell with well-being. I want nature to be better off. There are even some crackpot idiots who would rather not see us go to the moon and other planets. Here are these balls of rock and dust floating through space. And they hate mankind so much they don't even want us to go there and disturb the rocks and dust. It is a sick, sick person who prefers mankind just disappear or reduce their numbers or something, just so that rocks and trees and fish can live. But to remove this attitude to Mars or the moon is diabolical. And I wish he were right about this, that if we understood that it's freedom that leads to our well-being, then we would all be in favor of freedom. As a matter of fact, if you can show that freedom leads to our well-being, there are these people who will then say, okay, freedom is obviously a bad thing then. We need to have state controls on stuff. We need to stop the building of new power plants and stop new highways and stop new housing from going up. And we need to put population controls on people and reduce the number of new babies being born and reduce the population. You cannot get past them. It's called environmentalism. It is a new cult. It's a new religion. They don't even profess to be scientific, like at least the communists were scientific about their nonsense, or claimed to be. These people are just downright, they just claim morality is all they're after, and they think that humans are immoral, destroying trees is immoral, and so you can't tell them freedom leads to us having SUVs. That's why they're pissed. Now we skip a couple pages. He who does anything because it is the custom makes no choice. Ah, it's an interesting line. You're not choosing anything if you do what the custom is to be done. What everybody around you does that. That's what they've taught you to do. It's what your parents did. You're not choosing anything. Good point for people who think so romantically about the native cultures, how we're destroying native cultures and leading to them disappearing and so on. I have here a book called Arctic Dreams by Barry Lopez. Don't waste your time. Off page 175. He's talking about native cultures and stuff. This story of cultures disappearing has been repeated many times across the Arctic in the past 50 years. Nomadic hunters are consolidated in one place for purposes of trade. Then radical changes are made in the native way of life in order to adapt to a trade-based, cash-based economy. Some of the people make strenuous efforts to return to a semblance of the older way of life. And, finally, large segments. Now, we can stop there and we can say, and finally they become civilized, and they settle down in houses, and they have health care, and they give up their nomadic lifestyle. Or finally they are able to get an education, and finally their life expectancy has come up above 25 years of age. Finally, there's no longer a 80 or 90% mortality rate among their infants. Finally, starvation's not a way of life. But no, none of that. None of that at all. Finally, large segments of the native language are lost. Oh, no! No, we're not losing native languages, are we? Oh my God, what are we going to do? Finally, large segments of language are lost. And the deep erosion of social, religious, and political and dietary customs occurs under intense pressure from society. The deep erosion of social, religious, and political and dietary customs. Erosion? Why? These people were starving to death periodically. They had infant mortality that was horrific. Life expectancy that was abysmal. Why is it so goddamn valuable that people starve to death and not know the comforts of society? That is... There's 10 extra blood pressure points. So, he who does something because it's the custom is making no choice. He's not choosing anything. The people that just go on with the way things were, like the Eskimos who just continue with the way they were taught, aren't choosing their culture. If they do make a choice and come over to civilization and try to settle down in a house and try to not starve to death next year, then people like Barry Lopez judge them very harshly. I judge Barry Lopez even more harshly. Let's continue. He gains no practice either in discerning or in desiring what is best by simply sticking to custom. So he doesn't know what's good for him if he doesn't ever explore any of his options. If he just sticks to what he's given by his parents and society, then he doesn't know about what he desires to be best and so on. The mental and moral, like the muscular powers, are improved only by being used. Good point. If you never use your mental powers, if all you do is you just learn the way to dance that they have been dancing for generations, that you learn the rain dance or whatever, you learn all the customs of exactly how to make fish hooks out of bone and how to build your igloo or whatever, then you're not using your mental powers. It's like a muscle. If you don't use it, it's not going to get stronger. And in fact, the Eskimos were incredibly childish people. The faculties are called into no exercise by doing a thing merely because others do it, no more than by believing a thing only because others believe it. There you go. If the grounds of an opinion are not conclusive to the person's own reason, his reason cannot be strengthened, but is likely to be weakened by his adopting it. So, if someone accepts an opinion that they don't understand through their reason and logic, then his belief in it is likely to be weaker than it was before, whatever his opinion was before. If you accept some opinion but don't understand it, you're not likely to really fervently believe in it. So, if you accept the opinion that we all should be free, but you don't understand what freedom is, then you're going to be very nonchalant about giving up freedoms. And you're going to say, well, we all have freedoms, but on the other hand, people should be free from being offended. And if you don't understand what freedom is, then you're very likely to give up freedoms, the real freedoms, and pay lip service and verbiage to it. So again, this talks to the fact that we have to have the freedom of interaction and discussion in order to preserve our knowledge of things, our opinions, our beliefs, of what's true. If we can't freely discuss these things, then we're not going to be able to protect them. He who lets the world, or his own portion of it, choose his plan of life for him, has no need of any other faculty than the ape-like one of imitation. Now, that's harsh words against people like Eskimos who just want to live in their igloos, or Native Americans who just want to live in their teepees, or people in bamboo huts, or whatever, in some sort of backward villages in Africa who want to keep their native way of life and their animistic religion and stuff. He says that you're no better than an ape. You're just imitating. He who chooses his plan for himself employs all his faculties. He must use observation to see, reasoning and judgment to foresee, activity to gather material for decisions, discrimination to decide, and when he has decided, firmness and self-control to hold his deliberate decision. Now, I can have much, much more respect for someone who uses his firmness and self-control to hold his deliberate decision. I can have more respect for such a person than someone who says, I do this because my parents did it this way. And even if he chooses to do it because his parents did it this way, he still doesn't have me on board. And you say, that's his choice. But according to John Stuart Mill, if you just accept what came before you, then it's not true that you made a choice. You are simply stuck in a rut, as it were. Now we go a few pages down to page 76 here. There has been a time when the element of spontaneity and individuality was in excess, and the social principle had a hard struggle with it. I don't know what time he's talking about then, because the history of civilization is a history of moving towards privacy and individuality. So I don't know what this golden age of individuality was when the biggest problem was stopping individual actions. Maybe he's referring to something like the time in Greece before they outlawed murder, and murder was just a feud between families rather than any of the business of the state. Maybe he's referring to something like that. But he says society has now fairly got the better of individuality, and the danger which threatens human nature is not the excess, but the deficiency of personal impulse and preference. That's for sure. We do need more freedom, not less, but I just don't know about this golden age when we had freedom. If you do interpret back when murder was legal or not illegal as a time of individuality, then you say, what about the individuality of the people who got murdered? You know, so it wasn't so much a time of individuality as physical force and no controls over people. So take it as you will, but he's right about that last point, that today what threatens humans is the lack of freedom, not our excess of freedom. On to page 77 now. On the Calvinistic theory, the one great offense of man is self-will. All the good of which humanity is capable is comprised in obedience. So if humans can do anything good at all, what they can do good is to obey. And here's a quote from, he has this in quotes, is apparently his view of what the Calvinists would say. Here's a Calvinist verbatim statement from a Calvinist's mouth, if you will. Whatever is not a duty is a sin. If you're not bound to do it duty-wise, you shouldn't do it at all. That's a very grim view of life, but then their view of life was that life is a vale of tears, and we are all screwed. Now we skip down on to page 78. There is a different type of human excellence from the Calvinistic, a concept of humanity as having its nature bestowed on it for other purposes than merely to be abnegated. So the Calvinists view human nature as something to fight against, but he says there is this other group who believes that human nature maybe shouldn't be necessarily fought against. Pagan self-assertion is one of the elements of human worth, as well as Christian self-denial. There is a Greek ideal of self-development, which the Platonic and Christian ideal of self-government blends with, but does not supersede. It may be better to be a John Knox than an Alcibiades, but it is better to be a Pericles than either one. Now, I don't know who John Knox was, but I know who Alcibiades was. Alcibiades was in Athens, ancient Greece during the Golden Age. He was ejected from Athens for being a troublemaker, tried to come back and take over Athens, I think with a Spartan or maybe a Persian group of soldiers, fell into trouble in Persia, came back to Athens, so he was constantly moving about from here to there, if you will, and getting in trouble. And according to Socrates, Alcibiades was quite a partier as well, according to Plato, I should say, in some of the Socratic dialogues. So he says, it's better to be John Knox than Alcibiades, but it's better to be Pericles than either one. Pericles was a brilliant general. I think it was his doing to help at the Battle of Salamis, I think, was his plan to build a navy, and they were able to defeat the Persian navy, and the Persian army had to retreat. Quote, nor would a Pericles, if we had one these days, be without anything good which belonged to John Knox. Again, I don't know, John Knox is interesting to look into maybe. We skip down a little bit. In proportion to the development to his individuality, each person becomes more valuable to himself and is therefore capable of being more valuable to others. Interesting point. If we're talking about benefiting others, doing good for others, even if you just take pure altruism of other-oriented, then it's true that more individualism allows you to benefit others more. This was part of almost a religion of progress in the 1800s. People who ran railroads and owned large businesses and financial empires believed that it was their duty to engage in free trade and industry and try to make as much money and profit as they could, because ultimately everything they did in that direction helped other people ultimately. If you start a new railroad, you're employing all the people that work on it thereafter, and there are all these families now that have a place to get some sustenance. So it's always exercising your individual rights, your individuality, that brings about benefits to others. Good point. Something that was well believed at the time. I mean, if you take that route and say that I don't care about individuality and freedom, I just want to benefit others, then someday someone's going to say, oh, okay, well, you're wrong. Individuality doesn't benefit others, so now we're going to take away your freedoms and your individualism. And perhaps they're wrong about that. You know, it does benefit others, but still, you cannot justify it on the grounds it benefits others. You have to say, it doesn't matter if you can benefit others by enslaving me. You still cannot enslave me. We have to defend our rights on that grounds, not on the grounds that it helps others. It is essential that different persons should be allowed to lead different lives. In proportion as this latitude has been exercised in any age, that age been noteworthy to posterity. That is true. Any period of history where individualism has been stifled has been a very bad, sad, nasty period. And periods where individuality is all over the place and people can do as they please are much better off. Compare Greece to the Dark Ages, for example, you know. Now here's a bizarre, shocking line. Even despotism does not produce its worst effects so long as individuality exists under it. True. Look at, for example, the economic vitality of Nazi Germany, or the space program of Soviet Russia. Nazi Germany had private property as far as business went. Now, they had enormous tax rates, and they could come in and use your company for whatever they like. They could order you to do what they want. But, on the whole, there were millionaires. There were private businesses and corporations. They had some measure of private property. Not really, I know. But compared to the rest of the German culture at the time, there was some modicum of individual action in business. And the same is true with Soviet Russia and their space program. The worst effects of despotism didn't show up in those areas because they didn't restrict individuality in those very small, limited areas. Continuing, whatever crushes individuality is despotism, by whatever name it may be called, and whether it professes to be enforcing the will of God or the injunctions of men. So, when these people that you work with are crushing of individuality and want to enforce the opinion of everybody around, whether you work as a teacher in a school and you're not allowed to do anything you see fit or whatever, or if you work as an employee in a restaurant and you're not allowed to improve some efficiency in the restaurant because all the other people put together don't want to. That's despotism, according to John Stuart Mill. Now down to the next paragraph. It will not be denied by anybody that originality is a valuable element in human affairs. Again, he's so confident of this thing that he thinks he's come to understand is true. What about the Muslims? Wouldn't they deny that originality is a valuable element in human affairs? I mean, the Muslims are so anti-individualism, they don't even believe in science. They start every sentence with, because Allah wills it, or whatever. Like, why does the electron move this way or that way in the atomic structure? Because Allah wills it. Nice thought. A nice thought that no one would deny it. But unfortunately, people deny it. There are but few persons, in comparison with the whole of mankind, whose experiments, if adopted by others, would be likely to be any improvement on established practice. Okay, so mankind as a whole is doing pretty well. It's fairly seldom that someone can come along and improve things. But these few are the salt of the earth. Without them, human life would become a stagnant pool. Good point. Just because it's only 1%, just because it's only the crazies and the crackpots and the freaks that change society, we have to still give them all the credit for everything that's good in society. The strange idiots and crackpots and freaks are the ones that give us everything useful that we have. Everything good in human life comes from people who stand outside of what's normal and don't just take the status quo. Good point. Quote, not only is it they who introduce good things which did not exist before, it is they who keep the life in those which already exist. Now, that's an important point that the communists never appreciated. They thought, here are the factories, here's the technology, we just need to seize it from the capitalists and use it for the betterment of the people. But it takes a little bit more than just gaining control of it to use it. You have to maintain it in order to use it. You either progress forward or you go backwards, you regress. You either progress or regress. There's no standing still. So to just seize the technology and use it for the betterment of the people and ignore where the technology came from, Ayn Rand and John Stuart Mill agree, can't be done. So even if there were nothing new to be done, even if we had discovered everything, all arts were known, we would still need human intelligence just to maintain what we have, just to prevent its disintegration, so to speak. Now, we skip down a little ways. Persons of genius, it is true, are and are always likely to be a small minority. But in order to have them, it is necessary to preserve the soil in which they grow. Genius can only breathe freely in an atmosphere of freedom. Persons of genius are, ex vi termini, more individual than any other people. That is just a brilliant observation. They are more individual than anyone else, geniuses are. So because they are more individual than other people, they are less capable of fitting themselves into the small molds which society provides. So geniuses don't fit well into society. They don't fit well into the small nooks and crannies that are set up by society. And as a result of that, if we want geniuses, we have to allow quite a lot of freedom and say, well, society does it this way or that way, but you're free to do it a different way if you choose. Good point. It's amazing he ended up as a socialist, because once in a while he says some brilliant stuff. Now, people have sent me messages saying, don't get upset that your school in New York failed. You know, don't go hating on people and don't blame others. It's your fault. Don't blame others. That's been seriously put to me. And I know it's my fault, but it's sort of also their fault. Here's a thought on that. If a person of genius is a strong character and they break their fetters, the things that hold them down in society, then they become a mark for the society which has not succeeded in reducing them to commonplace, to point out with solemn warning as wild and erratic and the like, much as if one should complain of the Niagara River for not flowing smoothly between its banks like a Dutch canal. Now, I appreciate that sentiment much more than I appreciate the sentiment that I need to keep my head cool and not blame people. Now, I'm not going off of my head blaming people that my efforts at starting a school didn't work in New York and that I have to go back to Utah. I understand how valuable the education is. They don't. The people on the street don't. I mean, I can look out my window right here just about any time, any day, and see between 5 and 25 children just right on this little street in front of these apartments across the way here. There are tons and tons of children in need of an education right on this street, let alone this whole neighborhood for, 30 blocks in each direction. And nonetheless, I've not been able to get students. Now, I don't take kindly to the idea that it's my fault, but I'm also not mad and brooding and blaming them. This is the story of humanity. This is the story of society. The person who thinks outside the box and wants to change things is regarded as dangerous, as a threat to the way we do things and stuff like that. So, on the one hand, no, I'm not upset. But on the other hand, I do basically blame them for not knowing and understanding what I know and understand. I'm not angrily blaming them, but I certainly can't blame myself for the failure of thing. And to blame a genius for his wild and erratic behavior is like blaming the Niagara for not flowing calmly within its banks. Interesting thought there. All right, and we go down a ways. Let me say one more thing about that. I can understand why people wouldn't want to see me make the excuse. It's very easy to just come out with the excuse and say, oh, people are against progress, that's why my school failed, or oh, people are just hating on the genius, that's why I can't make a go in the world. That's easy enough, but those people weren't walking around with me putting in all the effort my wife and I put in to try to get students. So it's not fair of them to criticize something they have no inkling of. Not to identify myself with the genius that he's talking about, but someone who thinks outside the box and wants to change things is looked on with suspicion. And rightly so. I can't blame him for it, although I don't like it. Now we skip down a ways. No government by a democracy or a numerous aristocracy, either in political acts or opinions, qualities, and tone of mind which it fosters, ever did or could rise above mediocrity, except in so far as the sovereign. So no government can ever rise above mediocrity. Now, I would say even Greek democracy, I would question, but then I would answer yes, even Greek democracy. They killed Socrates for one thing, but to the extent that Greek democracy was brilliant and did rise above the mediocrity. It was because they had this extra breathing space for geniuses. They had freedom, vertical if not horizontal, or horizontal if not vertical. I mean, there were lots of ways in which you were not free in ancient Greece, in Athens, but the ways in which you were free, compared to the whole of ancient history, people were free in ancient Athens. That's the case. But when he says no government can rise above mediocrity, let's try to remember that when we're giving the government control of medical and health care and stuff like that, and when we let them control the building of roads and sidewalks, and we want them to provide the poor with food and housing and education, they can't rise above mediocrity. They never can. Now, he doesn't really prove that very well, and that's another thing I don't care too much for about Mill. He just asserts things. But he's right. Government can't rise above mediocrity. The initiation of all wise or noble things comes and must come from individuals, generally at first from some one individual. Anything that's wise or noble comes from not government, but individuals, and within that from one individual. Again, the power of the individual. This is the chapter here is called Individuality, aptly titled chapter. Anything useful comes from individuals, and is likely to be regarded with suspicion or even hatred by society. And that's not just, complaining and crying uncle because I can't succeed. That's an attitude that a lot of philosophers have noticed in history. We skip to the next page. He says, quote, "In this age, the mere example of nonconformity, the mere refusal to bend the knee to custom, is itself a service." Now, he's speaking a little carelessly there, I think, because if he could fast forward 50 years and see what came later, think of the turn of the century and the new artists and what was going on in Germany in the art world and in Europe generally in art. And nonconformity went from just being something geniuses do to being something that idiots do. It became a religion to not conform. And then it became a form of conformity in itself, because it wasn't based on rationality. It was simply based on being a reactionary against the old ways of painting or whatever. You just paint nonsense and crap and splotches on canvas, or paint it all blurry so you can't tell really well what it is, or it looks like a painting that's just getting started. You just done a sloppy outline. No, that's the finished work. That sort of individualism and nonconformity became a religion unto itself, because either you base things on reason and logic, or you don't. And if you don't base them on reason and logic, then they can possibly become a small religion or a cult, as modern art has done. And now you're chastised for painting objects or things or landscapes, instead of where they used to chastise you for not painting your landscapes or things very well. Now you're chastised for painting landscapes or things at all. Now we skip page 85 here. Different persons require different conditions for their spiritual development, and can no more exist healthily in the same moral than all the variety of plants can in the same physical atmosphere and climate. So plants require different climates and stuff, and so do people, so do different persons. And he's speaking here, referring to the fact that laws can change what sort of humans will flourish. And if you change the conditions in your garden and make the soil really acidic, it doesn't necessarily kill everything. It'll just kill off the plants that can't live in the acidity, and other ones will thrive. And it's the same thing with countries and dictatorships. You don't necessarily destroy every person and every person's achievements. You just change the type of people who achieve things, or even try to achieve things. And maybe the achievements that you'll get will be non-conducive to human happiness. Maybe that's what your laws will result in. Where the only type of creativity is types of torture and spying on individuals. But, you will get, there is another type of person that will thrive in those conditions, unfortunately. Now we skip down a couple pages. The general average of mankind are not only moderate in intellect, but also moderate in inclinations. They have no tastes or wishes strong enough to incline them to do anything unusual, and they consequently do not understand those who have, and they class all such with the wild and intemperate, whom they are accustomed to look down upon. Now, is he just speaking from, is he just being a sore ass, saying, oh, the general average of people, mankind, don't think very hard and don't ever care to incline themselves to any efforts in life? Is he just being a sourpuss jerk? Or does he have something really that's a point there? Because I noticed this on my own without ever having read either Mill or pretty much anyone else on this subject. I noticed that by and large, people are lazy, they don't care to change things, they would much rather make an argument against change. Anything from how to change the trash in a grocery store to how to build skyscrapers, or how to build nuclear submarines, or how to design things. Anything and everything in between. People don't like change. By and large, they don't like change. Stability of humankind depends on that attitude. But this raises an excellent thought. Only those who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world do. If you're not completely crazy and you think you can change things, then you won't change things. Only people crazy enough to think they can change things actually do change things. Nothing gets changed or fixed or improved by people who don't think they can change, fix, or improve things. It's a puerile thought on the one hand, but it's incredibly potent and just all too true on the other hand. We skip down to the next page. The only unfailing and permanent source of improvement is what? Altruism? Wanting to do well for others? Hatred of yourself? Drowning your ego? Trying not to be an individual? Trying to live for the community? No, none of that. The only unfailing permanent source of improvement is liberty, since by it there are as many possible independent centers of improvement as there are individuals. Now that's why liberty works so well. That's why capitalism works so well. Not because it's some incredibly brilliant system that's so well designed or whatever, but because it is a total mess. Because you have as many people trying as many improvements as there are individuals, if they care to, if they don't just follow what others do. The reason capitalism works isn't because capitalism itself is brilliant. It's because it allows 17 different brilliant businessmen to try their hand at making automobiles. And only 3 major companies will come out at the end, or 5, or whatever. But you cannot get to a system of progress by restricting and limiting what people try or what they do. And that's why capitalism and freedom work so well. It's the only source of permanent improvement. Now he makes an excellent analysis of China. And this is, you'll see how outdated it is. We'll get to that after we read through it. But everyone's all about the new China, and if you're not invested in China tomorrow, you're too late, and We're going to have to learn from China now. They're going to surpass us. And they have surpassed Britain, Germany, and Japan in the size of their economy. Now, it's America #1 and China #2. But this is an old story. I mean, Soviet Russia was a very big economy at one time. Nazi Germany was an important military power at one time. If you don't have freedom, you don't have anything. And China doesn't have freedom. So, but now's not the time for that. I've done videos on China. There's one called China New Country or Fascist Hag, or something like that. Fascist Hag, I'm pretty sure, wasn't it? Quote, "We have a warning example in China, a nation of much talent, and, in some respects, even wisdom, owing to the rare good fortune of having been provided at an early period with a particularly good set of customs, the work, in some measure, of men to whom even the most enlightened Europeans must accord the title of sages and philosophers." So he says China does have sages and philosophers, and their civil system and their laws and their culture do have a legacy of some sort of genius or brilliance or intelligence in them. Quote, "They are remarkable also in the excellence of their apparatus for impressing the best wisdom they possess upon every mind in the community, and securing that those who have appropriated most of it shall occupy posts of honor and power." Now, to train an aristocracy and then make sure that aristocracy gets into places of power, here he gives a little bit of lip service to it. But ultimately, that's the road to stagnation, because the ruling clique won't allow anybody but people like them to come up into their ranks. And when change is needed, like in Europe today, where multiculturalism has to be done away with, and it's been made illegal to speak out against multiculturalism, you can be prosecuted for hate crimes and stuff, and you have to go to certain universities to become part of government, and those universities are owned by the government and only teach the things that the people in government want them to be taught. That's the sort of situation Europe's in today, and that's the situation China has been in for eons. Surely the people who did this have discovered the secret of human progressiveness. And must have kept themselves steadily at the head of the movement of the world. On the contrary, they have become stationary. Right? So he says, surely if you've got this brilliant system where you train people specifically to run the brilliant system, and the brilliant system protects itself against people who aren't brilliant, then surely that would be great. But no, it's not. It doesn't work out. They have become stationary. They have remained so for thousands of years, and if they are ever to be farther improved, it must be by foreigners. I don't mind him saying that, but there's a lot of clowns out there who would call that a racist statement. They have succeeded beyond all hope in what English philanthropists are so industriously working at, in making a people all alike, all governing their thoughts and conduct by the same maxims and rules. Now that's a scary thought, that even back in Mill's time, English philanthropists were working hard at making everybody the same, because they are still working hard at that, and they've succeeded to a large extent in making everyone have the same opinions. Now, the more society disintegrates and the further downhill they go in this jihad, the Muslims taking over their culture, the worse it gets, and the angrier people get, and the more violent they get, and the more individuals are able to question what's going on just because there's obvious evidence to their eyes and ears that this is not working. And it's not theoretical anymore. It's actually daily a practical problem. So finally they're breaking out of the slumber in some way, but the only way they can break out now is violence. And that's a sad situation. And he suggests that that's what China was in for. The only way that they could change was to have foreigners come and infuse some new vitality into the culture. The modern regime of public opinion is, in an unorganized form, what the Chinese educational and political systems are in an organized form. Now, that's no longer true. Today, the educational and political systems in Europe are as organized as the Chinese system he's talking about, and just as stagnant and worthless and dangerous to human well-being. Unless individuality shall be able successfully to assert itself against this yoke, Europe, notwithstanding its noble antecedents and its professed Christianity, will tend to become another China. End quote. And so it is. And so it is. Brilliant. Now we skip a ways down, next paragraph. It is decidedly advancing towards the Chinese ideal of making all people alike. Monsieur de Tocqueville, in his last important work, remarks how much more the Frenchmen of the present day resemble one another than did those of even the last generation. So France was well on its way to this. Germany, Britain less so than the others, but Britain came in due time. Sad situation. Remember, liberty is the only answer. Brilliantly engineering a society is not the answer. Liberty is the only answer. If you say, we're going to do away with liberty so that we can have tolerance and not hurt each other's feelings, and everyone can have their own way of life, liberty is the only way to protect anything valuable. Now, he comes very close to calling selfishness a virtue. Listen to this. We are now in chapter 4, called The Limits to the Authority of Society over the Individual. I am the last person to undervalue the self-regarding virtues, the virtues of regarding yourself. So he says there are some virtues which you aim at yourself, not the virtues of sharing or empathy or whatever else, but the virtues of helping yourself. These virtues are only second in importance, if even second, to the social. There's the only other virtues which might even come close to being as important are social virtues. It is equally the business of education to cultivate both. And we skip to the next page, 2 pages later. If a person is eminent in any of the qualities which conduce to his own good, he is a proper object of admiration. So if a person does things that help himself, you should admire him, says John Stuart Mill. And he analyzes it at length, but for those of you watching, you probably are fairly familiar with